My name's Giuliano, and I'm just a regular guy who's always dreamed of being a chef. After graduating culinary school, I didn't have much to my name, just some talent in the kitchen and a burning passion to create something that would make people remember me. I grew up poor, in a neighborhood where every penny counted, and when I finally saved up enough, I bought a nearly bankrupt restaurant. It wasn't much: faded paint, creaky floor, and a kitchen that had seen better days. But it was mine. My dream was finally coming true. It all started with a dream, like some twisted gift from the universe. In the dream, I saw this dish, something so perfect, so mouth-watering, that it almost felt like the food itself was speaking to me. I woke up in the middle of the night, heart pounding, the taste still lingering on my tongue. I couldn't shake it, couldn't get it out of my head. The next day, I rushed to the kitchen after closing time, desperate to recreate what I'd seen. I spent hours experimenting, trying different combinations of spices, sauces, and meats. The image from my dream was clear, but the taste was something else. I'd never experienced anything like it. It was like every flavor came together in perfect harmony. But there was something more, something almost supernatural about it. I finally nailed it, after what felt like 100 failed attempts. I called it Il Capolavoro, the masterpiece. But what I didn't know was that this dish would be the beginning of my nightmare. At first, everything seemed great. I put it on the menu as a special, thinking it'd be just another dish that might draw some attention. And it did. First person to try it was an old man who'd been coming to the restaurant for years. He was a regular, always ordering the same thing. When he took a bite of Il Capolavoro, though, his eyes widened and he let out a gasp. "This is incredible," he whispered, his voice shaky. "Giuliano, this is the best thing I've ever tasted." I was thrilled, of course. Seeing someone appreciate my work like that, it was everything I'd ever wanted. He finished the dish in record time and asked for seconds. And then thirds. I had to tell him we were out of the ingredients. I'd only made enough for a few portions after all. He left reluctantly, but he was back the next day, waiting outside before we even opened. Word spread fast. Soon, people were coming from all over just to try Il Capolavoro. They'd eat it with an intensity I'd never seen before, like they were starving for it. Some even asked me for the recipe. I always told them it was a secret. I figured it was normal. People love good food, right? But then it started getting weird. The same people began coming back, day after day, always ordering Il Capolavoro. I tried to suggest other dishes, even gave out free samples, but they weren't interested. It was like nothing else mattered to them anymore. One night, after a long day of serving the same dish over and over, I closed up and headed home. My place was nothing fancy, just a small apartment above the restaurant. I was exhausted, but as I climbed the stairs, I had this strange feeling that I was being watched. I shook it off, thinking it was just paranoia from all the stress. But as I reached my door, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There, in the shadows of the hallway, was one of my customers, a man who'd been coming in every day for the past week. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, and he was staring right at me. He didn't say anything, just stood there, breathing heavily. What are you doing here?" I stammered, my voice trembling. He stepped forward into the dim light, and I saw that his clothes were stained with something dark. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. "I need more," he rasped, his voice hoarse. "More of that dish. Please, Giuliano, I need it." I backed away, fumbling with my keys. "We're closed. Come back tomorrow, okay?" He didn't move, didn't blink. "No, I need it now. You don't understand. I can't stop thinking about it." Finally, I managed to get my door open, and I slammed it shut behind me, locking it quickly. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I could hear him outside, scratching at the door, begging me to let him in. For the next few nights, I barely slept. I kept hearing noises outside my door. Footsteps, whispers, things I couldn't quite make out. And during the day, the restaurant was swarming with people, all demanding Il Capolavoro, like they were addicted to it. They started getting aggressive, pushing and shoving each other just to get to the counter first. I tried taking it off the menu, thinking that would solve the problem, but that only made things worse. They started yelling, threatening me, demanding I bring it back. One woman even threw a plate at me when I refused to serve her. "Don't you understand what you've done?" he screamed, face twisted with rage. "We need it. We need it." It wasn't long before they started showing up at my apartment, pounding on the door, pleading for me to cook for them. I called the police, but by the time they arrived, the crowd had dispersed, only to return hours later. The officers didn't take me seriously. They thought it was just a bunch of overeager fans. They didn't understand the desperation in their eyes, the madness that was slowly taking over. I was trapped. Every time I left my apartment, they were there, waiting for me. They'd follow me down the street, into the grocery store, even into the restroom. I couldn't escape them, no matter where I went. And every time they saw me, it was the same thing. "Look for us, Giuliano. Please, just one more time." It was driving me insane. I started seeing their faces in my dreams, their eyes hollow and hungry. I could barely focus on cooking anything else, and when I did try to make il capolavoro again, something was off. Wasn't the same. Flavor wasn't right, and the obsession didn't fade. It got worse. Much worse. One night, I heard someone breaking into the restaurant. I rushed downstairs thinking it was just another desperate customer, but what I found was far more horrifying. There, in the middle of the dining room, 5 people, each of them holding knives, forks, anything they could find. They were fighting over the scraps of il capolavoro, tearing into each other like animals. Blood was everywhere, splattered on the walls, pooling on the floor. They didn't even notice me at first, too consumed by their hunger. But then one of them looked up, and I saw something in his eyes that chilled me to the bone. It wasn't just hunger, it was madness, pure and unfiltered. He lunged at me, knife in hand, and I barely managed to dodge. I grabbed a frying pan from the kitchen and swung it as hard as I could. Connecting with his head, he went down, but the others turned on me, screaming, clawing at me, desperate for more. I ran out of the restaurant, through the streets, not knowing where I was going. I could hear them behind me, their footsteps echoing in the night, getting closer and closer. Made it back to my apartment, slammed the door shut and barricaded it with whatever I could find. I could hear them outside, banging on the door, screaming my name. "Giuliano, Giuliano, give it to us. We need it." I didn't know what to do. I was terrified, cornered like a rat in a cage. And then, in my desperation, I remembered the freezer. I stumbled into the kitchen, my hands shaking. Freezer was my last hope. I could lock myself in there, maybe wait it out until they got tired and left. I opened the door and stepped inside, cold air biting at my skin. I pulled the door shut behind me, plunging myself into darkness. But as I stood there, listening to the sounds of them tearing through my apartment, I realized something that made my heart stop. The freezer locked from the outside. I stood there in the darkness, the icy chill of the freezer seeping into my bones. My breath came out in shaky gasps, each one forming a cloud in the frigid air. Outside, I could still hear them, the deranged mob tearing apart my apartment, frantically searching for me, for their next fix of il capolavoro. I pressed my back against the cold metal door, realizing just how deep in trouble I was. My mind raced, trying to come up with a plan, any plan. Get out of this alive. But all I could think about was that this door, my supposed sanctuary, locked from the outside. I was trapped in here, no way out, with nothing but the growing dread and the freezing cold to keep me company. The noise outside grew louder, more frantic. They were getting closer. They would find the kitchen soon, and when they did, it wouldn't take long for them to realize where I was hiding. My heart pounded in my chest, the fear threatening to swallow me whole. Suddenly, there was a loud crash. Someone had found the kitchen. I heard the sound of pots and pans clattering to the floor, drawers being ripped open. They were searching for anything, any trace of the dish that had driven them to madness. And then I heard a voice, low and raspy, coming from just outside the freezer door. "He's in there," the voice growled. "I can smell him." My blood ran cold. They knew. They knew I was hiding in here. I pressed myself harder against the door, as if somehow that would keep them out. But deep down, I knew it was useless. They'd find a way in, and when they did, there'd be no stopping them. The banging on the door started. First just a few thuds, then growing more frantic, more violent. The metal rattled with each hit, and I could hear them shouting, screaming for me to open it, to let them in. They weren't just asking, they were demanding. their voices filled with a crazed desperation that sent chills down my spine. "Giuliano! Giuliano, please! We're starving! We need it! We need it!" I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms, trying to hold on to whatever shred of sanity I had left. Banging grew louder, more ferocious, and I could feel the door starting to give under the relentless assault. They were going to break it down. It was only a matter of time. And then, with a deafening crash, the door flew open, slamming against the wall. Cold air rushed out, mingling with the warm, blood-scented air of the kitchen. And there they stood, a twisted mass of people, their eyes wild, their faces smeared with blood and grime. They looked less like humans and more like monsters, driven by a hunger that consumed them completely. First one lunged at me, his hands clawing at my throat. I stumbled back, slipping on the icy floor, and we both went down. His grip tightened, squeezing the life out of me as he screamed, spit flying from his mouth. Cook for us now." I struggled, trying to push him off, but he was too strong, too crazed. I could feel his fingers digging into my neck, cutting off my air, and I knew I was about to die. But then, in a burst of adrenaline, I grabbed a nearby meat hook that had fallen to the floor. Without thinking, I drove it into his side with all the strength I had left. He let out a guttural scream, his grip loosening just enough for me to shove him off. Blood poured from the wound, soaking his clothes, but he didn't stop. He came at me again, and I swung the hook, catching him in the face. His head snapped back, and he collapsed, twitching on the floor. But there were more of them, so many more. They surged into the freezer, clawing and biting, their faces twisted in hunger and rage. I grabbed anything I could find, knives, pans, whatever was within reach, and fought back, slashing and stabbing, trying to keep them at bay. Blood sprayed across the walls, staining the once pristine ice, but they kept coming, relentless in their pursuit. One by one, I took them down, each kill more brutal than the last. The floor was slick with blood and viscera, the air thick with the stench of death. My arms ached, my body trembling from the cold and the exhaustion, but I couldn't stop, I couldn't let them get to me. But then, in the chaos, I slipped. My feet went out from under me, and I hit the ground hard, the wind knocked out of me. Before I could get up, they were on me, their hands tearing at my clothes, their teeth sinking into my flesh. I screamed, pain searing through my body as they ripped me apart. It was a feeding frenzy, and I was the main course. My vision blurred, the world fading in and out as I fought to stay conscious. But the pain was too much, blood loss too great. In my final moments, as the darkness closed in, I could hear them, their voices a twisted cacophony in my ears. "More, Giuliano, we need more, we're still hungry," and then nothing. The cold took over, and I was gone, just another ingredient in their endless, insatiable hunger.